Yeah, just what was it? A month or so ago, couple months ago, my good friend, who's actually here today, we were both in the middle of a tornado in Midlothian, Texas, and it came from nowhere. It was silent. It was a nice night. If you guys remember, there was a lot of flash lightning happening that night, and I'm like sitting there. I'm like, I'm gonna sit on a hammock, and so I go sit in this hammock, and it's just flash lightning, and he ends up getting back to the house. And as I'm staring out, just watching, this is just gorgeous, man. And all of a sudden, the wind starts. I'm like, I know that sound. I don't think that's a good one, you know? So I'm like, I'm going to go ahead. So I get out of the hammock. Right when I do, the wind just gusts, picks up this metal furniture, and throws it into the yard. And I'm like, yep, we're done. And so I went, grabbed the furniture, put it back, walked inside. And right when I did, I heard, woo! Ran to the bathroom, and all I hear is my buddy Cam. We have the same name. It's awesome. So he's like, Cam, what's going on? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm like in the bathtub. And it's a lot of screaming, a lot of, just, well, it lasted just a couple seconds, right? But the devastation in this area was crazy. The fence is gone from one side to the other. He's got this, portable building that got flipped somehow right side up in his neighbor's backyard. As we're walking out and we start seeing, the neighborhood, it's just this one house was in half. It was just, I'm like, but the flash lightning was so beautiful. What happened, man? This has really escalated. And that's the storm of life. They just come, and you're not even looking for it. Because for some reason that day, I just wasn't really looking ahead at my weather map. I didn't know it was coming. Boom. Man, that hit quick. The storms of life, they come, and we know this. James 1 talks about it. It says, there will be storms. Get ready for it. The waves will come. Get ready for it. Make sure you're not walking in your own wisdom when that happens. And P.S., that's not the time to prepare. So Thomas has been kind of giving us some really good tips on how should we approach this on a very practical level. And so last week he introduced what he calls 3D priorities. And by the way, marketing, I was like, Thomas! He's like, yeah, I came up with that, Cam. I'm like, yeah, you did. And so what were the 3D priorities? Anybody remember the first one? Devotions, that's right. Daily devotions. What's the second one? Dinner. He's going to be so happy. All right. What's the third one? Day of rest. That's right. So devotions, dinner, day of rest. And do you see how he somehow connected those to the three important relationships we have in life? Daily devotions, us and God, right? Our dinner. We see us and others. And we see the day of rest is something that we all very much need, right? And so I'm blessed to be able to be here, and hopefully Thomas can enjoy a little bit of that himself here for a minute. But 3D priorities. And he's like, here's the deal. If we're not fostering all three of those relationships, something's going to break. We were just talking about this with the youth a little bit. It's like when something in the body isn't working right, you got to fix it because it starts to affect other things. You can't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to do the Devo part, but not the others. We all know this. This is not mind-blowing information. But doing it, that's where it gets really difficult. That's where it gets really difficult. And what it speaks into my life is this. It's just we are a mess. That's what it just tells me. It's just man, we are a colossal mess. So one of my favorite songs in the world is this song. It's a country song. I think I'm allowed to say that up here. It's called Canvas, all right? Shane Smith, the Saints. Love those guys. And he says, our life is like a canvas. Paint some every day. But when you think you've got it all figured out in your head, what happens? The man's like, no, you don't. Okay? We're painting this canvas each and every day. And when I was in college, I had a friend, became a very close friend, but dealt with some very dark demons. He had a father who actually committed suicide when he was in middle school. His mother fell into dementia and actually passed away from a brother who went into drug addiction and died from that. He has no living family. And I met him in that time of life, kind of right in the middle of it. And went through these, it was like the storms that just kept on blowing in for him. And I grew up with a very kind of secure and solid family life. And I just started to realize how blessed I was for that, first of all. But then also how broken the world is. And everybody's looking for it. And so you'll see this painting here, and if we can throw it up on the screens, this is something he gave me when I graduated. He had bought this midway through college. And the title of this is Confused Rainbow. All right? And I asked him, I'm like, why did you get that? What's that about? And he's like, well, man, he said, I think it's me, man. Like, what do you mean? He said, I feel like I got all the colors. I just don't know how to put them together. And I was like, man, that is so awesome. And I was in love with that. And so finally he gave it to me as like a graduation present when we left. And it's been hanging over my bed or in my house ever since. It's just that daily reminder. Like a lot of us, we've got the colors. We just don't know how to put them together. And so chaos just ensues over and over again. And so years and years ago, there was this evangelist named Billy Graham, who probably everyone in here has heard of. All right? And he had some pretty epic gatherings, okay? Well, during one of them, he preached out of the passage we're going to look at today. And this particular passage, out of Daniel chapter 5, he says he believes is the greatest reflection of and foretelling of America. And my question for you is, I'm not going to say it is. I'm going to say we're going to walk through it. You guys make you guys decide yourselves. But I also want to encourage you, get on YouTube and watch his sermon. It's going to be way better than mine. Okay, so go spend some time with Billy. All right, time with Billy's a good time. All right, but he preaches this and he says this Daniel is a book of prophecy, but it's also an apocryphal book, which is, in other words, it's looking into end times. It's kind of a both and situation. And what it's doing, though, is Daniel is a prophet who is speaking into the lives of kings. And he's placed in this scenario in a very interesting place because Jerusalem basically was under siege, taken over by King Nebuchadnezzar. They took all of the best and brightest, and they made them work for the kingdom. They didn't have a choice. And if you remember the beginning story of Daniel, he was the faithful one. Him and he had a couple buddies. Anybody remember their names? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there was a little skit when I was younger. They called the one guy Abed-to-go, and he was like a walking bed. It was weird. But anyways, I'll never forget that out of my head. I cannot remember the rest of the skit or how they tied that in, but it's funny to me. And so you got these guys, and they're like, you know what? We are supposed to eat in a certain way. God has given us a command. And this is, as you look into the New Testament, the idea of dietary restrictions aren't really as strong as they were back then. But what they knew back then was this. When God says do something, you do it. All right? Well, here's the deal. That was not everybody else in the camp. But Daniel said, you know what? Hey, we're going to do this. And if we come out healthier than everybody else, will you leave us alone? They're like, fine. Well, it turns out, following God, things turned out better. And what Daniel found was over and over and over again, him, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they found themselves, as they were following God, being lifted up into higher places of authority within the kingdom. As you know, a couple chapters later, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got some people angry because of worshiping God and not the king. And this idol that he had built for himself, of himself. None of us do that, of course. But this image that he built up about himself, that he wanted people to look at and like and follow and tweet forward. You guys are all tracking, right? We build up these images. And they said no. So they threw him in, and we found out, you guys have heard the song, There's Another in the Fire? There was an angel in the fire. They didn't die. Well, next thing you know, we walk into the chapter here, but what's crazy is that this is about 30 years later, okay? We're coming into the tail end of their time in captivity. It's about 70 years, and it was foretold by Jeremiah there would be a 70-year period that you will be in captivity, all right? And so just a couple of quick little notes, because we're going to actually be reading through some scripture today. It's going to be a little different than maybe we've done on a lot of Sundays. But this is one of those stories. It's one of the craziest stories in the Bible, but there's so much profound truth. And when Billy Graham says it's the perfect reflection of America today, I've got to go, maybe. What does that mean? Is it worth it? Is it worth our moment? But a couple little quick notes to know is that as we dive into it, it's going to talk about a king, and it's a father, and it's going to talk about the queen, all right? So the father in this particular story, that was a colloquial term that was not just understood as being his father, but actually like someone in the upper line of succession from him, all right? So Nebuchadnezzar was probably his great-grandfather, okay? But when it says that, don't get lost between that if you're a history buff. The second one is his queen, same thing. The queen that we see here is probably his mother, not his wife, okay? What you see is that the queen kind of just walks in without even asking necessarily. And back in the day, like in the book of Esther, you just don't get to do that, all right? You get to be ushered in even if you're the queen of the king, all right? But when mom comes around, she can do whatever she wants. So, any of the kids understand? Yeah, when mom wants to come up, mama does what mama does. So, all right, so we're going to go ahead and dive into it, all right? So, just kick it off. I got too many verses here. Kick it off. Daniel chapter 5. Let's dive in. King Nebuchadnezzar threw a huge party for 1,000 of his princes, or the lords of the area, the leaders, and he drank a lot of wine in front of them. All right. While he was under the wine's influence, Belshazzar commanded that the gold and silver equipment that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem, not just Jerusalem, the temple, be brought to the party so that the king, his princes and his consorts and his secondary wives, okay, dude, could drink wine out of them. So the gold equipment that had been carried out of the temple, God's house in Jerusalem, was brought in, and the king and his princes and his consorts and his secondary wives drank out of it. They drank a lot of wine. I mean, if we get the point. And they praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So I've titled this first one, The King Does His Thing. Okay? That's this paragraph. I wanted to call it something different. I was going to steal from another pastor friend of mine. It says, it's my party and I'll drink if I want to. Okay? But the king does his thing, all right? We're in church, people. All right, so if you guys look at this particular part, what's really interesting is the name Belshazzar, the first three words there are Bel. That's actually representing the god, Bel, that they worship. And his name literally means searcher of treasure. He's looking for all the treasures, right? His life is reflecting that in all of this, right? I mean, everything about him is opulence. And here he is. He's searching out with everything he has got. And notice, there's kind of a three-part succession to this particular passage. In the first verse, we see that he's drinking. But he's not just drinking a lot. He's drinking a lot where? In front of them. You can see he's kind of the king, right, who's at the front of the table. And he wants to let everybody know, I brought all you people here, I'm feeding all of you, and I can drink more than all of you, and I can do whatever I want. I'm the king. Starts with pride. Then it moves forward in the next several verses, and what do we see happen? We see him just going nuts. But then it moves to the point where they're like, you know what? Let's not just be dumb, let's be stupid. No one has ever drank too much in here, I'm sure, and done something stupid. All right? But here's the deal. They were drinking, they did something stupid, but then they're like, you know what? We're not just going to do something stupid, we're going to do something offensive. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to take this temple stuff and we're going to use it for ourselves in order to make this statement that guess what? I can take what's in the church and I can use it for my own glory. I can use the things and the resources of this church however I want, for my own party, for my own liking, for my own needs. And I'm sorry, to me, I feel like that is a lot of America. The church has become a resource, and that's why religion has a bad name. It's not about a relationship with God or one another. It's about using people. And here's the deal. This has been my prayer this year is, God, help me to be known as someone who loves you and loves people way more than I did last year. I can get totally caught up in the mechanics of life. And I don't feel like I'm probably the only person here who does that. This passage has been very, very convicting in that. People are not resources. The law of reciprocity is baloney and it's not biblical. I don't do things for you because you'll do them for me. And families are building their lives on this ridiculous truth that they have created. And it's killing families. And it's killing marriages. And it's killing churches. Y'all have probably heard about the Methodist church split that's going on. It's in the news finally. I'm not going to talk on it right now because honestly, it's a bunch of politics that doesn't affect us, okay? If you want to talk about it offline, let me know. Let Thomas be happy to talk with you. But the reality is it's people whose arrogance have gotten the most of them. And they've forgotten that this isn't about your system. This is about the hearts and the lives of struggling souls who need Jesus. Don't miss that, man. You will miss everything. And their pride has led to what? Destruction. Chaos. Sacrilegion. And where does it end? Straight up idolatry. We don't get there overnight. I mean, what does this represent? The gods of gold and wood, the things that we can create with our hands and control. What does that mean? We're creating gods in the image of me. I've just taken a God who created me in the image of him and put him into a box as small as me. And then I wonder why life doesn't work out. The king was doing his thing. But then something happened. Verse 5. The king's color changes. Right then, the finger of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the king's palace. I want to go ahead and repeat that. Right then, the finger of a human hand appears and starts writing on the plaster of the king's palace wall in light of the lamp. And the king saw the hand that wrote it. The king's mood or color changed immediately, and he was deeply disturbed. He felt weak in the knees, and he was shaking. The literal translation for that is the joints of his loins were loosened. Take that where you want. All right. So the king yelled, calling for the enchanters, that the Chaldeans and the diviners, and the king told the sages of Babylon, anyone who can read this writing, just tell me its meaning, and we're going to give you robes, and we're going to give you gold chains and stuff, and we'll rule the kingdom. You'll be the third in command. And so verse 8, all the king's sages arrived, but they couldn't do it. Verse 9, at that point, King Belshazzar was really frightened. All the color drained from his face, and his princes were also very worried. And so what does he do? He freaks out. And lucky for him, Mama shows up. Hearing the commotion coming from the king. Can you just imagine the chaos that's going on in here? We've gone from like party, yeah, to I mean, this is what's happened, all right? Anybody ever seen a bar fight? No one in here does that, all right? But here's the thing. It's gone from we're all just partying to someone taking a swing, all right? You've all seen the old Westerns. You know, you get the chair and you break it over the back of his head and John Wayne, Pilgrim, what's going on? And it just gets like, it's gone nuts. And so mom walks in, and she says, long live the king. Don't be so disturbed, and don't be so frightened. Come on, buddy. There's a man in your kingdom who has the breath of holy gods in him. When your father was alive, this man was shown to possess illumination, insight, and wisdom. Like the very wisdom of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed this man as chief over the dream interpreters, enchanters, Chaldeans, and diviners. Yes, your father did this. Because this man, Daniel, the one of the king named Belshazzar, possesses an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight into the meaning of dreams. Listen. Now, in light of all that, summon Daniel, and he'll explain what's going on. All right? So what does he do? He goes and he calls on Daniel. And so, what happens? Daniel walks up and he's like, all right, what's going on? And he said, hey, I'm going to give you gold chains. I'm going to give you all this stuff. If you can just fix my problem. And Daniel responds in verse 17, keep your gifts. Give the rewards to someone else. But I will still read the writings of the king and interpret it for him. Listen, your majesty, the Most High God gave kingship, power, glory, and majesty to your father Nebuchadnezzar. Because of the power God gave Nebuchadnezzar, all people, nations, and languages were terrified of him. And he did whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, killing or sparing, exalting or humbling. But when he became arrogant, acting in stubborn pride, he was pulled off his royal throne and the glory was taken from him. He was driven away from other humans, and his mind became like an animal's. He lived with the wild donkeys. He ate grass like cattle, and dew from heaven washed his body until he realized the Most High God dominates human kingship and sets over anyone he wants. Verse 22, but you are his son. You have submitted, even though what? You've known all of this. You notice the shift? We don't get to blame Nebuchadnezzar anymore, buddy. You knew this. You know the story. You own it. This is you. You saw that happen to your grandpops. And you thought, maybe I should do it too. And you kept going with it. I mean, you literally saw someone go from the king of what seemed to be all to a donkey eating the grass. His mind was so shot. His life became nothing. And Daniel's reminding him something very clear. Hey, leadership, rulership, it's all under my foot. I raise it up, I tear it down. And you better get it together because you know better. Here's the challenge, is where this starts to shift to us. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 24, we're told the same thing. Let's look at it right up here. God's wrath is being revealed from heaven against all the ungodly behavior and the injustice of human beings who silence the truth with injustice. We're going to come back to that verse, but next one. This is because what is known about God should be plain to them because God made it plain to them. Ever since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen because they are understood through the things God has made, so humans are without excuse. Although they knew God, they didn't honor God as God or thank him. Instead, their reasoning became pointless, and their foolish hearts were darkened. While they were claiming to be wise, they were made fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images that looked like mortal humans, birds, animals, reptiles. So God abandoned them to their heart's desires, which led to the moral corruption of degrading their own bodies with each other. Does it not sound a little bit like what's going on with the king? If you go back to the very first verse, this is the part that gets scary. This is the part that we really need to be paying attention to. Where does it begin? It goes to all the people who know better, but silence the truth through what? Injustice. How many of you guys can remember the first time you saw like a bloody or gory movie? Or a movie that like dropped the bad bomb. And you're like, and you look at your mom, look at your dad, or you're in a movie theater and then like someone's just like, kissing someone on the cheek and your mom's like, ah, I mean, who's been there? Right? And slowly over time, you watch more of that and more of that. Gorier and gorier, uglier and uglier. Language just becomes more and more coarse. You don't even react. Thomas and I were talking a couple months back, and he had mentioned that someone had said, hey, you should read this. And they knew he was a pastor. He's done like counseling with them and stuff. And he said, all right. Or not read this, you should watch this. Send him like this YouTube show. I don't remember what it was. But he said, basically it's like a Game of Thrones sort of thing. And he's like, you think I want to see that? He's like, but it's like at some point, the Bible calls it our conscience becomes seared. We just don't feel like we used to. It just doesn't feel the same. We kind of just get sucked into it. And all of a sudden, what was just somehow becomes normal. I remember our brother Billy. He said that something about this particular passage he felt said something about America. Anybody seeing things becoming normal that just shouldn't be? Anybody seeing things become unnormal that shouldn't be? Like a community of faith. I made the comment before, like our church has been in this very healthy place where, just kind of slowly doing this. That's not the world. And we're just like, all right, God, give us wisdom, because the reality is that we know being in a community with other people is so important. Imagine a football team with one guy out there running around, okay? You see how these guys get hit? Okay? You got to have your blockers and your tacklers. You got to have the team. Or you're just going to get crushed. Because you can't see it. The worst is when you see the quarterback who's hike, he's over here, and he's giving them too much to read because he's looking straight where he's going to throw the ball, right? And so everybody's moving, and then someone gets free. It's the big boy from over here, and blindside. You know what I mean? You look at that, and you're just like, woo! That's why we need biblical community. Life is going to blindside you, I promise. You got to have someone who can point out the kinks in your armor before you get out in the battlefield. It's just important. That's weird today. In the last 10 years, people used to go to church twice a month. Now they go once. I don't know. What does that say? How many of those folks do you think are having daily devotionals, spending time with dinner, and actually having a day of rest? I don't know. When I sit around with the youth and I ask them a question, I said, what do you think would be the number one word to describe your generation? And almost every one of them says depression. I don't know. What's up with that? And so what I think we're walking into here, guys, is twofold. As we're looking back at the passage, it starts off with him just having the wrong view of reality. His reasoning was all jacked up. It was all about him. It was all about fun. It was all about kind of getting some sort of picture out there, imagery of himself. He was working so hard because it probably wasn't true. He found out a little bit later it wasn't true. He wasn't as in control as he maybe thought he was. But it started with that. And then it moves to him not having the right resources to deal with his problem. And so he calls out to every other resource possible. Notice, Daniel was the last choice. Y'all see that? I mean, it's like he went through everything. And how many stories do we have of people who go through everything they can to try and find that peace and that joy and that contentment and that security and that love and that... And they have to get to the very end of themselves. There's a beautiful story called AHA. Well, it's actually a resource. And if anybody wants to do it, I know a lot of our small groups have. But AHA is an acronym for alarm, hearing, and action. In other words, an alarm starts going off. A lot of us just don't respond to it until it becomes so annoying and so loud that we have to react. The problem is that some of us will do something to drown it out so much that we never have to hear it again. Those people are as lost as Belshazzar, and their lives will be as such. All right? But then there's those of us who hear it, and sometimes we need that alarm to go off more than once. Okay? But we slowly start listening. But it's until we hear it and then act on it that we're actually going to find a transformation within our heart. And for so many of us, we want to push that alarm as far away from us as we can. The problem is, it ends like this story ends. It ends with Belshazzar having his kingdom taken over. It's at the very last verse. Well, 30. That very same night, Belshazzar and the Chaldean king was killed. Verse 31, Darius the Mede received the kingdom at age 62. Because as we went back to the writing on the wall, this is what God said. Enough. Enough. Mene, mene, tekel, parson, verse 25. The meaning is, your days are numbered, which meant over. Verse 27, I've measured your life and what it's worth, and it has no weight or value. Verse 29, Paris means your kingdom is divided, and it's going to be given up. You've lost it all. Your life, your possessions, your people. And as we seek to further and further invest in ourselves, notice all of the other relationships just start to fall apart. And that's what's going on here. And so where do we wrap this up? Where do we tie this bow? Well, for me, I just want to throw up a picture here. I've shown before. All right, many of us, we know this story. And so what does this mean for us as we walk into the new year? Like with the youth before we met today, I like to say, at the beginning of the year, I just want to look back and say, hey, where did we struggle? And maybe what would be God's solution for how we walk into the next step to that, rather than my own. Maybe I need to reflect on why that's something that I'm carrying over to the next year, right? And a lot of us, we think that this is the here to here. Like this is Romans 12:2. This is the pattern of the world. Reality is no. That's not how it works. And many of us, we see these different areas of our life as not having value or being something wrong, when God is actually trying to draw us into a deeper relationship with him, to set an alarm off in our ear so we don't get so far as Belshazzar. And so for all of us to take a moment and reflect, God, what alarms are being sounded right now for me and my family? Because what was going on during their party, and what's going on during the clinging of their idolic worship, is that their demise is creeping in the back door and is about to completely destroy them. And many of us can be just in the throes of life, doing our thing, and we don't realize that there's something creeping in the back door. What is it? What's the alarm? The prayer is that God would give us wisdom to hear that alarm. And this is how I'm going to close today. Go to the next verse. 1 Corinthians 1:20 says, "Where are the wise? Where are the legal experts? Where are today's debaters? Hasn't God made the wisdom of the world foolish?" Next verse. And in 2 Corinthians 3:2-3, it says, "You are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone." You should that you are Christ. You should know is what it says, that you are Christ's letter delivered by us. You were written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God. You weren't written on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. How am I making this connection here? A lot of us, we want to create order in disorder, but we don't have the capacity to do it in our own strength and our own wisdom. We have to draw to a higher wisdom. We have to connect into the vine. We have to have the devotions, those table talks, and the time that we take off each and every week. Right? We have to. Or your wisdom will lead you to a place of destruction. And each and every one of us, what Paul's saying is we are writing a story each and every day. We're a canvas that's being written on each and every day. And each and every stroke matters. And this is what kind of hit me this week. What are letters made of? The letters we write. Letters. See what I did there? Alphabet letters make up letters. My mind was like blown when this happened, all right? I'm like, of course! One of my favorite stories, and this is the close, is, I don't know if it's a real story or not, but man, the impact of it for me was huge. There was this dad who every night would take his daughter and say, "Hey, we're going to go pray, we're going to pray, we're going to pray." Like, great, great. So they'd kneel at the bedside and pray, kneel at the bedside and pray. One night he's getting home late for work, so he's walking up the stairs. And he hears this kind of murmuring coming out of a room. It's like, just kind of sneaks around. The door's open, looks in, and just hears her. She's on her knees. She's just going, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. By the way, did you guys know the alphabet song has changed? I'm offended. All right, yeah, don't check that out. It will freak you out, all right? But anyways, all right, back to this. A, B, C, D, E, F, all right? And so he's just like, listens to her do this like over and over again. He's like, so he goes and kneels next to his daughter and he's like, "Honey, what you doing?" "I'm just praying." "Aren't you saying the alphabet?" "Yeah." So, "Well, why are you not saying words?" I said, "I don't know what to say, so I figured I'd give God all the letters and let him tell me." Right? Every one of us is writing a story this year, all right? And we're going to run into places where our reasoning or our reasonings for why we're doing them are jacked up. Our resources aren't there. And we sure better get on our knees and say, "God, here's the deal. You're the Alpha and the Omega. You're the beginning and the end. All things are held together by the power of your word. It is not my will, but yours be done, because lest I do it with you, I will never get it done." And purpose and meaning will be as fleeting as Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was, right? My prayer for us is that we would put the letters in God's hands. And for each and every one of us, that means your life. That means your kids' lives. And to ask, is this in line with your will? Father God, we love you and we praise you. And we ask that today your word would have just spoken maybe some semblance of truth into our hearts, into our lives. And that, Lord, that we would leave here with just something to chew on, Lord, that we would find another level maybe of calm in the midst of our storm. Maybe a little less confusion in the midst of our canvas. And Lord God, that we would find a reason to live life that just infuses life into those around us. We love you. We praise you. Be with our pastor and his family as they travel. We do all this for your glory and our good. Amen. All right, guys. Have a great week. If a couple of people can hang out for the put down the Christmas stuff, be awesome. I'll be hanging out. But otherwise, wonderful start to the year, y'all.